All right. Hey, hello everyone. Hey, Tarun, Cindy, Tushar, Austin. Um, Happy to host Bet Spaces today.
Let's go.
GM, very excited to be here and to be with such a star-studded group of panelists.
Hello, everyone.
Yo.
Cool. I think, topic of the day is what's been on everyone's mind probably in the last couple of months. I'm going to talk everything from Politify to prediction markets to the recent launch of Bet on Drift and Solana, the first capital efficient prediction markets on Solana. I think before we start off, it would be great to get a round of intros from everyone. Maybe Austin, you can kick it off, and then we can have Tarun and Tushar.
Sure. I'm Austin Federa. I run strategy at the Solana Foundation. I've been involved in the Solana project about 4 years at this point. I'm really excited for you guys to have launched this. This is something I've been hoping someone will build on Solana for a while. So really excited for this launch and excited to be chatting about this today.
I'm happy to go next. I'm Tushar, co-founder and managing partner at Multicoin. We've been investors in the crypto industry since 2017. Invested in Solana early on, also early investors in Drift. And I actually wrote one of my first ever public asset reports was on a prediction market protocol called Augur, which the people listening who are kind of crypto OGs may recognize, though Some of the newer entrants may not remember that project. So excited to talk about the evolution of prediction markets from way back then to now.
Cool. Hey, I'm Tarun. I run a company called Gauntlet, and I also invest through Robot Ventures, and I've had the pleasure of working with Cindy and David and the team for a while, and being an early supporter. I would say that prediction markets are probably what got me into crypto in 2015 or 14, like really much more seriously. So it's finally amazing to see them, realize the potential that they've had for so long that was always kind of untapped.
Yeah, and I think Bet is a great platform. Cindy, do you want to talk more about it and what Drift is doing?
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I think as a quick intro, I'm Cindy. I'm the co-founder of Drift, and we've actually been around in Solana for a pretty long time, since 2021, when the first round of AMMs and order books were just starting to get built on Solana. So it's been really cool to see DeFi and prediction markets now merge in a very synergistic fashion. I think this launch is important because it not only showcases that DeFi has a real use case outside of just betting on the price of crypto assets. It's useful for also betting on what real world outcomes actually look like, and that's what fundamentally Bet is, and why we came to launch it. We don't see prediction markets as any different from a perpetual market. Fundamentally, the synthetic mechanics are the same. It's just a way for you to bet on any function. And yeah, I think a quick intro on Bet is that it's fully integrated within Drift V2. So perps, borrow, lend, and prediction markets under the same roof. Users are able to deposit any asset on Solana as collateral. So you take advantage of the massive capital base that's already on Solana, the speed of Solana, and the culture of users on Solana today, and that's what you're here to combine. Yeah, so trade anything with any asset is the TLDR.
Tushar, I know you started off by saying that you wrote one of the first papers on prediction markets, if I'm correct. Do you want to talk more about how you saw them evolve and from Angar to Polymarket to now Drift? What's similar about them? What's changed? How do they differentiate? Things like that.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. I don't know if it was one of the first papers on prediction markets more broadly, but it was one of the first papers that I wrote on crypto prediction markets. So I think we published it in like 2017. But Augur was one of the first ever protocols on Ethereum. And that's because prediction markets are a pretty obvious use case for DeFi. There's people who want to go and express their opinions on probabilities of things. And these types of markets don't really exist in significant size outside of crypto, mostly due to a variety of reasons. But you don't see a lot of liquidity on the predictits of the world where they cap your bet size. So Augur was interesting from the very beginning. And we saw a pretty significant market opportunity for it. However, Augur struggled with the lack of scalability on Ethereum, L1, and just it's extremely expensive to transact. Lots of stuff that listeners today on the spaces already know, so I won't belabor that point. But then that evolved into Polymarket. And we've known Shane for a while, followed him for his entrepreneurial journey. And Polymarket is kind of the next iteration of prediction markets after Augur. And they were able to basically be a more pragmatic version where the fees are lower. It's not so much focused on the Oracle resolution mechanisms of Augur, which Augur was much more of a Oracle protocol with a prediction market built in. And Polymarket is much more of a prediction market, and then there is an Oracle component to it. But Polymarket, in my opinion, suffers from a lack of composability. And that's one of the main value props I think Drift is able to offer with the V3 version of prediction markets, which I think is the newest version, most powerful version that just launched, is the fact that you can compose these different things together. So not only can you compose bets on different prediction markets together and cross margin all of that, but you can also compose a bet on, hey, is Trump going to win the election? And then I can also take a levered position on Bitcoin in order to construct a portfolio based on those two things. Maybe I think if Trump is going to win, Bitcoin's going to rip. And if Trump is going to lose, then Bitcoin is basically going to stay flat and maybe be slightly down. And so I can use the probabilities of those events and payoffs to construct an interesting portfolio. Now, that's just a very simple, relatable example. But as there are more and more prediction markets launched, like for example, today, I think the Drift team announced the Fed rate cut prediction market. Now, I can imagine a lot of really interesting trades put on combining that Fed rate cut prediction market with the price of Bitcoin. It's interesting because rate cuts, that is a market that already exists, but it only exists for institutional investors who can go trade on CME. You can already go speculate on interest rates there. But if you're a regular person, you don't know how, and you're not going to get access. And so democratizing that access through a platform like Drift and allowing composability with other markets, I think is the most exciting iteration of prediction markets I have seen yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really concise and good way to talk about the evolution. Like you said, Tushar, I think it started off as an Oracle product, very deep fundamental tech primitives, and then evolving into more of a pure consumer product and something that has been built for users to use, right? I'm curious, I think, and you guys can feel free to jump in as well. Why, is this a cyclical thing? Why are we talking about this now versus, from the boom of Solana between 21 and 24? Do you think that U.S. election cycles are creating this opportunity catalyst for prediction markets to take off again?
Yeah, I do. I think, honestly, prediction markets are a component of a larger platform. And I struggle to see a prediction market as a large-scale standalone business because of the extreme cyclicality and interest. I think by far the most dominant thing to bet on is sports, but sports betting works very well, in TradFi rails with FanDuel and Betfair and some of these others. And I think the market opportunity for crypto sports prediction markets is limited because it's not that much better than the traditional alternatives. And also, composability is not as valuable for that. Where political prediction markets have a lot more impact on capital markets more generally and on other assets. So I think what we will see is a huge cyclical, every 4 years, increase in interest in prediction markets. I think those should be integrated in with a platform that allows you to cross margin and compose positions together. But it's very hard to have a standalone product where you're expecting your volume to grow 100x to 1000x every 4 years and then collapse down by 99.9% the next year. Right? That's just, even for crypto, that amount of volatility is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we continue with the discussion, Mert, our final speaker, just joined us. So maybe I'll give you some time to intro yourself and tell us TLDR of what you think of prediction markets on Solana.
Hello. Sorry, I'm late. Somebody was fighting Solana in a group chat, and I have some problems. Yeah, so hello, my name is Mert. I run Helios, which is an infra company on Solana. What I think about prediction markets, I mean, I like betting on stuff, so I like prediction markets. And with Drift, what I like is I like just having everything on one place. And so I'm a pretty big believer in being vertically integrated. So that's kind of how Helios works. We don't just do RPCs and go across chains. We build everything for that chain because I think you can get pretty good insights into customer behavior, but also solve their problems in a more efficient way. And so I like what Drift is doing in that it's not just a betting platform, but also there's other DeFi primitives like perps and whatnot. And then it seems like you guys are mixing those up to actually offer better products. And yeah, I think super excited to see kind of how it plays out. I'd rather bet on Canadian politics because I hate Canada, and I think I'll be right. But I understand there's not much liquidity because nobody likes Canada.
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely list Canadian election markets as well when that becomes relevant. But yeah, I think that's a good segue, Austin, to maybe talk about prediction markets on Solana itself. When we launched on Monday, I was actually very surprised by the positive reception from the Solana community. But tell us a little bit about why this is why this is an important moment for Solana, and why you think Solana is the best place to really host these markets.
Yeah, prediction markets are, I think, one of those interesting topics where there's a lot of different ways to think about them and why they've sort of captured some attention. For those of us who are kind of political nerds, you can go back to 2012, and the sort of centralized prediction market space was very interesting in that it often got a lot of election things and political topics right. Prediction markets, and then you look at like Futarchy, which is not a prediction market, but also not a prediction market. And there's a lot of intersection here about like, can we just get more things to be market driven? And for a long time, the barrier to getting more things to be market driven was that we didn't have good markets. The cost of execution on these markets was too high. The liquidity provision was too low. The cost of locking up your capital to make some sort of social or political or governance related change was just too difficult. And so I think there's a lot of stuff that's all combined together that makes this quite interesting. I mean, the first is the opportunity that this is not a passive position, right? Well, I mean, it's passive position, but there's yield generation opportunities on the assets that you're locking up as part of your bet proposition. That's new. That's something that doesn't really exist in other types of models here. And so this really plays off of the composability thesis of Solana, that things can interoperate with each other and assets can be at work in multiple places simultaneously. And also the cost of execution is near zero on a network like Solana. And so there's a lot of stuff that's combined to make this kind of the perfect time to launch something like this. I think a lot of people came to the network for maybe NFTs or some meme coin mania this spring. We got a ton of new users, and a lot of them are kind of looking around and going like, okay, but what's more serious? Like, what do I do next now that I've sort of aped in on a bunch of meme coins? And something like prediction markets feel like a really strong product market fit for that. I want to kind of go back a little bit to one of the things Tushar was saying earlier, which is like sports betting, right? And like, oh, the sports betting opportunity is different, right? And part of this is sports betting is actually kind of not exactly unprofitable, but it's actually one of the lowest margin forms of betting and gambling in the centralized TradFi space. People must think, oh, DraftKings and these guys, they're making tons of money. They are, but their margin is significantly smaller because the cost of capital is so high. And this is one of those things where you look at blockchain's ability to reward the people who provide capital and really disrupt the value stream of this stuff. And, blockchain feels like a very natural fit. Fast blockchain feels like an even more natural fit for this. And, that's how we end up with the stuff on Solana.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think you mentioned meme coins earlier, and the kind of evolution of people going from Solana using meme coins and now having a prediction market type product. Tarun, one thing that you said to me pretty early on, I think this was a couple months ago, that meme coins are an unbounded prediction market, and they're sort of like the earliest primitive. How do you see that? I mean, given Polymarket's dominance in the last couple of months and the growth of products on both Solana and outside of Solana, do you see that audience for meme coin traders, rotating into prediction markets? And yeah, I'm curious where you see that going in the next couple of months.
Yeah, so I guess like maybe if I take a couple steps back, the idea of prediction markets, I feel like have existed for like at least 25 years. I think even before Robin Hanson, there was a lot of literature on like, oh, what would happen if you had a political betting market? In some countries, it was made illegal before the concept even existed. I think the one thing to kind of take away from all of the historical attempts at prediction markets that failed is that they tried to always overdo the feature set that they had. So, their first sort of generic prediction markets tried to be arbitrarily conditional. So I could say, I bet that Harris will win and she will lose Michigan and she will also win Texas and will also win Florida by 20%. By adding in the conditionals, you actually make it extremely annoying to have enough liquidity because you sort of have to have liquidity for each of those markets, and then you have to sort of distribute it across them. The thing that was interesting about meme coins was in response to events, for instance, like after this unfortunate yachting accident of over the last week or whatever, there were a ton of meme coins almost in response to that happening that people made, right? There was like, things making fun of yacht crashes. And I think there's this thing where meme coins have this ability to make new markets much more quickly than prediction markets. So people kind of are able to respond quickly versus like, no one has really figured out the truly permissionless prediction market landscape yet, where you can make the prediction market, the oracle behaves as expected, and you can source liquidity. You kind of need all three of those to work in order for things to take off. Meme coins sort of get 2 out of 3 of those. They have the liquidity, and you can permissionlessly make it. There's no oracle, of course. And so I guess like, if we kind of take a look at the future of prediction markets, the liquidity part is clearly the part that crypto has enabled versus the centralized prediction markets. Even if you look at the UK bookies who have had US election betting forever, that never took off as much in some ways. And so I guess the main point is like, somehow over time, the ability to have more and more sort of permissionless and in a lot of ways unbounded creation of new markets, and also these conditional markets that people have dreamed of for years. I feel like that's like the future that hasn't been reached yet. And hopefully, being able to compose things and taking advantage of DeFi allows you to have liquidity for that ridiculously niche market, like Harris wins but loses all these other states.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the interesting thing that we're seeing is that like the scope of prediction markets right now is still pretty curated, and haven't seen anything that enables truly emergent behaviors to pop up. I think crypto as a permissionless layer already enables new types of behaviors, but if you could allow anyone to list any market permissionlessly, and in response to events that are happening in crypto, just like meme coins, that could open up a whole new kind of design space for prediction markets. So yeah, I think this would be a good time for Mert to jump in as well. I think you've talked a little bit about what what prediction markets could look like post elections and how they could be integrated into a platform like X and beyond. So maybe tell us a little bit about your thesis going into that.
Sure. I mean, thesis is probably a strong word here for me. I was just shit posting, but I mean, so it seems to me like prediction markets. And by the way, I think that rebranding is just excellent. Like, because my friends would just call it betting, but we call it prediction markets, and it just sounds way cooler. But I think like this is something that can actually onboard people who have no idea what's going on or who don't need to know what's going on in, let's say, crypto specific framings, right? Like my friends who are super degenerate bet on like virtual hamster races or something like that. But they also bet on like other world events. And so like this is an example of a product, or at least primitive, where you can have this, let's say, permissionless layer on the blockchain, but then you can have some clients spin up depending on the jurisdictions of, you know, whatever localities these people are in, and actually go ahead and get customers without catering specifically to CT. So that's like, I'm thinking if I were building something like this, I'd be pretty excited to like go after markets that are just outside of CT, and you know, talk to different kind of user bases who like. I mean, I wouldn't go. It really depends on kind of, because you also need to be targeted with your go-to-market. Like you don't want to say like, hey, you can bet on anything here, so it'll just confuse people. But I think like, so for example, with Blinks, I think it's pretty interesting. Because you don't actually like people with big followings can just post some, you know, market that they think is interesting or entertaining, and people can just kind of gamify that and bet on it. I think somebody like made a market about me moving out of Canada, which I thought was like funny. I don't even know the answer, so it's an interesting dynamic. And so I think like the overall point is, so like I tweeted, so the context behind this is that, you know, what happens to prediction markets after the election, right? Like, do they kind of pivot to sports betting, because that's kind of the, let's say, the majority of use cases today around betting, or can we get like creative and start tying this into SocialFi and social dynamics? And then especially on Solana, where you'll now have things like Blinks. And then especially once Blinks have mobile support, you can just kind of scroll Twitter and see like an event that you have an opinion on and just be like, oh, you know, like I think this will happen. Let me put some money on it. And it's just something that wasn't really happening before. So I think that that's interesting. But I think fundamentally, what's most interesting for me is kind of twofold. One is kind of what I mentioned earlier around the vertical integration of this by DeFi platforms. So like Drift has other products within DeFi and finance and liquidity and whatnot. And I think combining those results in some interesting product advantages that you can get if you're just a pure betting platform. But then second is, and I think this is where most of the work will be done, and I think it's the largest unknown, is how do you kind of use this primitive that's like, you know, people have been betting for thousands of years, I would say, probably in bespoke ways. But how do you now use this and actually go and get users? Because like it's been super difficult. I think Polymarket's one of the first folks ever to actually go outside of the CT bubble. Like you can see some of the graphs on like Perplexity or Wall Street Journal even. And I think that's pretty underrated. Like that just hasn't really happened before. It's been kind of like just orange coin go up or down has been the public's conception of crypto. But if you can kind of go after people who weren't in crypto to begin with, and they don't even really need to understand crypto, there's a lot of interesting new onboarding primitives like smart wallets and whatnot, and like payments apps like Sling and whatnot that can really abstract away the crypto version of this. And I think if you can kind of combine those, then there's like a real shot on just being able to get more users and be like a pretty interesting use case. And I think like the other part of this, and this is not surprising because I say it all the time, I think it's actually fundamentally not going to be a technical problem. Like, of course, there'll be technical issues and engineering issues, but I think it'll always be a distribution problem and like a go-to-market problem, where it's like you're trying to identify markets that have this demand for speculating on the outcomes of certain things. Maybe it's fights, maybe it's even like I don't know, karate combat things, since influencers seem to be doing that a lot these days. I think just identifying those markets will be a challenge, but I think that's a solvable problem, and I think we'll get there because there's a lot of smart people working on it. And I think once that's the case, then this will be one of the biggest use cases of crypto. Is kind of how I see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Austin talks a lot about super interesting ideas, so yeah, I'll let you talk about.
Yeah, one of the fun questions is like, what happens to prediction markets after the election? I guess there's two ways to think of it. One, super legit question. The second is like, what happens to derivatives after the stock market runs up? And the answer is like nothing. Like the options and derivatives like keep going. These things are not are. I think we could see worlds where we start to see prediction markets expanding into other types of predictions. I mean, in some ways, the traditional financial industry has robust prediction markets. We just call it options trading, right? Now, there's different. Obviously, true, and you can get into this way better than me. There's functions of those, but they are used to speculate on what a company's profits will be, coming into a next quarterly earnings report or something along those lines. And so, I think we could see the idea of like prediction markets getting into a larger category here than something that's just election related. But there's still a lot of things to bet on in the political space too, right? Will this big initiative pass? Will this big initiative not pass? These types of things as well. And so I think a lot of this depends on what the consumer demand is. One of the things I'm curious to see people start exploring are secondary prediction markets. I don't mean like reselling your prediction market pieces, but like multi-clause dependent prediction markets. Like, okay, so I can bet that Mitt Romney is going to win the election. Okay, but by how much, right? And you start getting these sort of like multipliers on your potential payouts or knockdowns on your potential payouts based on sort of the higher level of specificity further down the funnel that you get, for lack of a better term. I think there's a lot of interesting, cool opportunities there for those types of applications. So I'd be interested to see what these things look like getting into other sort of hot button issues. You could see these type of markets appearing for who's going to win the Oscars, right? Who's going to get the Grammy this year? Obviously, like who's going to win the Super Bowl? There's a bunch of like obvious easy ones like that, but this really comes down to like what is a culture of prediction around, and this sort of fits in very nicely to these ideas that we are disintermediating the media experience, right? More folks are going direct. And as more folks start going direct with messaging, I think you can also see potentially more folks going direct with predictions as well, and relying less on traditional analysts and analysis and putting their opinion or their thoughts front and center. And we could see a world where some form of like socialized prediction market is almost like a next generation of like political YouTube or something like that. And it'd be very interesting to see this idea of like, not only am I engaging in a prediction market, but I am attempting to convince others that my position in the prediction market is correct, and therefore moving the market in a direction that'll be profitable for me, but also in a direction that I think is true and accurate. We basically have that in politics already, right? Like there's no accident that the groups that are funded by right-wing think tanks support right-wing politicians, left-wing think tanks support left-wing politicians. There's an economic interdependency there, and one of the cool things about crypto is it it strips all these things down to their core and their most bare versions of them. And I'd be curious to see that sort of full stack integrated and also disintermediated.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in on that. I agree with a lot of the ideas that Austin mentioned, and to add on, I think that there's room in prediction markets for crypto specific events. Like, for example, a prediction market on will the US government sell some of those seized Silk Road Bitcoin by a certain date, as determined by some sort of public announcement or something like that. Or will the Mt. Gox distributions happen by this date, or will the FTX estate distributions happen by a certain date, and how will they be carried out? I think that some of these big crypto capital market things, prediction markets may offer a cleaner way to bet on those than just betting on the price of the asset. And once again, I think that this could lead to interesting levels of composability between the already existing perp markets on Drift, along with these new prediction markets. So I think there's a lot of event-based trading that people typically use options for, and options are a great product if you're, a giga-brain trader who knows how to understand delta and vega and theta and all of these different Greeks, and you want to think about all of that stuff, and they're an absolutely fantastic tool. But for the regular kind of person, options can be quite difficult to wrap your mind around. And so I think prediction markets focused on specific capital markets events could be another way to express those views. And, once again, very, very importantly, compose those with other perp positions that you already have.
Yeah, you can already imagine a market for will Sol hit $1,000 or by the end of the year, or will Fire Dancer actually release mainnet by the end of the year, and using that to hedge out your long Sol position. So I think those type of structured bets to be expressed is like super interesting. I think, Tarun, I know you talk about options versus perps and versus now prediction markets a lot. Do you kind of see prediction markets as a way to express binary options, or how do you see that sort of fitting into the types of assets that crypto users might want to eventually trade?
Well, I think one thing about the options market that people forget is it's extremely dynamic. For instance, like 5 years ago, 0 day till expiry options basically didn't exist as exchange tradable products, and had maybe de minimis OTC volume. And now there's something like 50% of overall equity options in the world. So there's sort of this thing where people have started going further out on the risk curve with options to things that are probably much closer to binary options and prediction markets for normal, boring, traditional companies, which is like a huge shift. Because like before, a lot of the one side of the options market was just people who had way too much long exposure, and the other side was people who wanted to get a premium. The other side was sort of people who wanted to hedge. But the 0 day till expiry kind of contracts have very similar trading behavior to perps and prediction markets, or much closer than they do to normal traditional stuff. And so I think there's also this change in how people are trading microstructure wise that is making traditional markets look more like crypto, which historically I think it was the other way around, where like people in crypto started adding all these hedging products, and like they realized, oh, like I can't just hold spot Bitcoin forever. And it's sort of interesting to see like the opposite take place for the last few years. I think the thing that's really interesting, and I think the experiment you're kind of trying alongside these kind of pure bets on crypto markets, is the idea of betting on non-crypto financial outcomes, like betting on interest rate, betting on all these things that are sort of like banned or indirectly banned in a lot of places. Like they're not really prediction markets on interest rates, there's sort of interest rate futures you can trade, and you can approximate something that looks like predicting what the next Fed rate is, right? There's sort of an implied guess from the market, but there's no direct proxy. And I think to Austin's point about the culture around prediction, you kind of need something that people want to predict directly, as opposed to infer from other portfolios of assets, right? Like I could try to imply what the probability of Sol being $1,000 is by end of year by looking at a bunch of different futures contracts and options and whatever, right? But it would be very noisy and indirect, and would, because there's not that much liquidity for a lot of the assets that have the highest signal, would not be very useful. So I think there's definitely this thing that you need to find prediction markets that have something that people want to predict directly and don't have other proxies for estimating in other ways. And so, yeah, I think the interesting thing to take away from all this, at least from my 10,000 foot view of this, is just the idea that like the normal markets are sort of adding in features that look like crypto, and I think prediction markets might be a way of the two of them merging together more cleanly in the long run.
Yeah, super cool. And I think maybe we can transition to talking a little bit about the current markets that everyone really cares about, which is the U.S. election side. Um, and I'll leave this as an open question, but we've been looking at a shift from mass media telling us what to believe to a group of the public influencing the actual outcomes of the events. How do you think that's played out in the last couple of months, where an actual prediction market that force has started to almost influence electoral outcomes? You see that continuing to trend in that direction versus using media as a way to be the true settlement marketplace?
Oh, I think that's a really fascinating question. I do think that the media loves covering prediction markets because it gives you pretty charts, and journalists love putting pretty charts in their news segments. And prediction markets' open interest in trading volume is still quite small relative to the overall economic impact that a political election can have. So I would not be very surprised to see partisans on either side going and trying to influence a number on the prediction market in order to, increase voter turnout on their side or increase fear on their side. Like saying, actually, I'm going to predict that the opponent is going to win in order to mobilize voters on my side to show up more, because prediction markets are a big part of the way that I think the election is covered and will be covered. And anything that can be manipulated for political gain will be manipulated for political gain.
Oh, Mert, Turin, any thoughts on your side?
On my end, I haven't really kept up with politics because I don't. The U.S. politics stuff just seems wild to me, so I'm just sticking in my lane, Canada. But yeah, I think there's certainly a very non-linear dynamic between like what source of data drives what kind of narrative. I think for these things to be truly predictive or emergent on truth, like prediction markets don't determine truth. It's more like they converge on it. And for that to work, you need a lot of liquidity, a lot of people, and like everything needs to increase, right? Like the law of large numbers. And I think certainly like Polymarket's done an interesting job of this. but like I'd be cautious of thinking they represent. Like, so for example, one of the things in the past few elections, from what I see, is that like polls, for example, have been largely inaccurate or just super misleading. I think certainly there's signals to be picked up from prediction markets, but you need to definitely look at a bunch of other factors. Like, you know, who's making the bet? Is it kind of one whale that's doing $1 billion, or is it like a bunch of people who think something is true? Does that even matter? I'm not so sure how to reason about these things. Tarun would be much smarter and rigorous in kind of driving something. So I'm not too sure, but I think like the more people engage with this and the more liquidity increases, then probably the more likely that you converge on something that's, you know, as least error prone as possible within the context of markets.
The only thing I would maybe add is, I think a good documentation of this kind of phenomenon where people have moved from like trusting, you know, sources that are quote deemed to be correct, like, you know, a poll or media, to suddenly being like, I'd rather just bet on it instead of trying to discern whether the truth was told to me via this institution. I think the new Nate Silver book, the kind of dichotomy between this notion of like the people who really go into, would prefer to learn something via betting versus trying to learn something via diction. He kind of has this difference between the river people, who are the people who are the risk takers, the ones who have a lot more conviction and just like trying to gamble to find their way, versus what's called the village, which is like people who have proof of authority, like they trust government, degrees, brands, stuff like that. And I think the evolution over time of like the tension between those two groups, he chronicles it pretty well, and I think it does describe sort of what this kind of a lot of the phenomena everyone else mentioned before. So I actually highly recommend reading that book.
I think we're going to take a break from some of the technical side of things and talk more about like some political questions. Uh, there's like a lot of information and misinformation about Kamala Harris's and Donald Trump's proposed tax cuts, tax proposals. How much do you guys think like misinformation will influence voters compared to the previous elections? And do you think prediction markets can help like reveal a little bit more of the truth from traditional like social media and media? Open question. Anyone can chime in.
So I'll take a shot at this. Although Tushar are probably much more politically adept than me. I just, I'm not sure if I can fundamentally kind of believe that. So like prediction markets are good at certain things, but like when it comes to something as like elusive as truth or something along those lines, it's very non-linear, meaning like everybody can believe kind of one thing. Okay, like so you can probably just take Nassim Taleb's Black Swan thing as an example, right? Like nobody knows that there's these things called black swans. Everybody thinks swans are white, let's say, and then one day you just make an observation. And it's like, okay, there's black swans, and now everything's different. Or like the life cycle of a turkey, right? Like you chart it out over time, and it's like its well-being is increasing over time, and then one day it's just boom, the turkey is dead because it's Thanksgiving. And so I think with truth or events, let's say, because I mean prediction markets are just speculating on events, always have this very counterintuitive, non-linear aspect to it, meaning it doesn't necessarily matter what the popular view is, right? Like if everybody believes something, but then the truth is actually this one little thing that nobody really saw, that's actually the truth, but people due to the nature of or the structure of these markets, already think that was the case. I think like Solana is another good example when it was like at $8 and people are like, oh, it's like dead. And that was like the consensus view. And so if you were to bet, let's say people on social media at least were saying it's dead. And let's say fund managers were kind of getting out. I know some VCs were even saying like, do not build on this chain to portcos and newly funded folks. But then there's like a small group of people who are like, actually, that's not correct. And you work up your reasoning from kind of first principles, and you're like, actually, it'll be quite strong. And it's like, okay, the truth. Let's say if it were quantified by prediction markets, it seemed like most of the people with money, their consensus view was that it wouldn't survive, or something like that. But that wasn't the case. And so I think with events like that are like nonlinear with asymmetric information, it's just going to be very hard for betting markets to actually map to truth. Now that could change, assuming there's like a lot of liquidity in the future or something. But I think fundamentally that stuff won't be too high signal. I think what would be high signal is just kind of just making it a bit more like I think it's a good. I don't actually view it as truth seeking as much as it's like a more like a consumer product. Like there's some speculation to it, some narratives that form around it, some communities form around it. It makes for good talking points, which leads to further debate and criticism, let's say. And then maybe that results in some new thoughts. And so I think it'd be like a catalyst in discussions, in the formation of ideas. But I don't think fundamentally it can, and I don't think this is a popular opinion, but I don't think it can fundamentally converge on truth or something like that.
Oh yeah, I'd like to chime in with just like a short summary of what I think Mert just said, and I completely agree with, which is money does not buy truth. There is objective truth, and these prediction markets or other versions of this, futarchy, etc., cannot buy truth for non-objective things. And going back to what I said earlier about political partisans using capital to distort prediction markets to advance a narrative, you can easily understand and expect politically motivated people to try to use money to buy truth. And in this era of propaganda and fake news and misinformation and all the stuff out there, I don't think that prediction markets will be immune from that. So that's why, like, the thing that I'm most interested in for prediction markets is portfolio construction and financial assets, and thinking about how certain events may affect financial assets. I do not think that prediction markets are particularly useful at all for predicting like the effects of a policy, or is this a good idea or not, or something like that. I think that doesn't really. I don't think that works. I think it's too easily manipulated. Money should not buy truth.
Another thing I'll add is kind of just the concept of skin in the game. I'm kind of just a parrot of just Nassim Taleb's books, but I mean, I think one thing that'd be interesting, which has made me pretty angry on Twitter, is like people will kind of say something and make like this strong claim, but then they'll have zero skin in the game to that claim. So basically, kind of what I mean is like they'll say something like, "Oh, like this is going to happen and it's going to ruin everything," but they are completely detached from the outcome of that prediction. So there's no, like, if it doesn't happen, they don't suffer anything, even though they put all their social capital to kind of advocate for it. So like for the most obvious example is like, okay, hey, I think Sol sucks. It's going to go down. It's, shit. It's going to be dead in a year. It's like, okay, if you want that to hold some weight and have some skin in the game, then like publicly post a short position and prove that you did it. And then maybe your statement holds some weight. I think you can kind of do the same parallel in prediction markets. Like, and this is kind of what I meant in that tweet where I think SocialFi could get interesting. Where let's say you have a claim that you want to make, like, I've seen the data. I think very clearly that, X is going to win this fight. Like, I know I'm right or something. Now you can say that, but if it's wrong, the only thing you lose is maybe you just delete your tweet, and you don't really, there's no real second order effects there. But if you put your kind of money behind it and you show skin in the game, and then people are like, oh, okay, interesting. Like, this person actually believes this. They put up like millions of dollars. And then it kind of causes people to take that view more seriously. So I think it could be interesting in kind of illustrating the concept of skin in the game with certain claims, because like social media, people just make claims left and right with no real weight attached to it. They'll say something one day, the complete opposite the next day, and there's no consequences. And I think if you tied the consequence of skin in the game to some of these predictions, then I think there's like an evolutionary loop between ideas and like the views that survive. So I think that could be interesting. Yeah.
Do you think any sort of prediction markets would influence someone else's views on what they believe is the truth?
Probably, yeah. I mean, people are so bad at interpreting data, which is another one of my super unpopular opinions, is that I think data in most cases is actually very misleading, and because nobody knows how to interpret it. Social media is like super, let's say, infamous for people being influenced by even just the slightest headline with zero sources. And so if you put money behind it, then I think it'll certainly influence what people think the truth is. And I think that's kind of where the liquidity argument also comes in. Like, if there's like, $10 billion of liquidity and like people are actually putting serious money behind something, then I think they'll be influenced by it for sure. But it's not clear to me if that's a good thing or not, because like Tushar said, people can kind of just buy, or at least give the illusion that they can buy truth, but then like it can just be social dynamics, and it can be the consensus view. And so it's not clear at all how that would play out. But yeah, like, to answer your question, it would definitely influence people.
Do you think there's any degree of more or less misinformation than previous cycles and in this election?
Yeah, it seems to be getting worse. Look, the fact that you can use AI to generate plausible looking things and have, accounts like bots that are basically responding and seem like a human, but is actually an AI with a particular motive, I think definitely makes it harder to tell what is real and what is not. And this appears to be a linear trend over time. Like, it is harder and harder to know because there's just more and more tools available to spread the narrative that you want to spread.
What do you guys think is the most pressing issues of this cycle? Like, what do you think like matters the most to most voters, at least in the U.S.?
I have no idea on that. I'll skip that question and pass to Tushar. But for the first one, like, is misinformation getting worse? That's kind of what I meant by the previous answer, which is like, information is cheap to spread, right? Like, it doesn't cost anything. Content, you just press on a tweet and maybe a free ChatGPT plan or Midjourney plan, whatever, and that's it. But if you kind of get this new social dynamic where it's like people just believe you more or less, depending on whether you have skin in the game, then the cost to spread information or strong claims is somewhat higher, right? Like, if you say like, okay, I believe this, and let's say without prediction markets, you just say it and then people forget about it. But with prediction markets, it's like you said it, you back it up with some sort of, let's say, capital. In this case, it's literally money, and that makes people take the concept maybe a bit more seriously, or at least if it's the wrong information, maybe you suffer some financial consequence and there's kind of a Darwinian mechanism that kicks in, that like you can't just at zero cost spread bullshit, and people will take you more seriously because you're putting in some cost up front to spread that information. I think that's like still super early, but I think there's definitely something there. And again, these things kind of just come to social consensus and the dynamics that emerge from that. But I think adding some sort of skin in the game to these things with prediction markets certainly should help at least maybe stabilize the volatility of misinformation.
Yeah, I think the issues that are most important in the political election are many. That's been covered elsewhere. It feels out of scope for me to comment on what those issues specifically are. I think different people care about very different things, but I do think that crypto is a major issue in this election. And I think that we are, as an industry and a community, finally on the global stage. And this is the kind of stuff that we were dreaming about 10 years ago in terms of relevance for the industry. And it's becoming real right before our very eyes. And everyone's a little bit tired after, 10 years ago feels like 100 years ago, given how much stuff happens in crypto. But you have, presidential campaigns talking about crypto and embracing it, at least from one of them. And like that's such a huge milestone. And I think the reason that is happening is because there are a significant number of crypto only or single issue voters and donors. And if we speak together with one voice, we can help get the outcomes that we want. I wouldn't tell anyone how to vote or anything like that. Like if some other issue is more important to you, like fine, that is your prerogative and your decision for sure. But I do think that at least if we speak together, we can have a lot more political power.
Cool. Tarun, do you want to jump in with any finishing thoughts before we conclude the spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think the funny thing about the notion of misinformation is it's sort of this like constant moving target, right? I think in the 10 years ago, when people used the word, it was like probably if I looked on the equivalent of what would have been Google Trends or like some index of like how frequent the word was in 2014, probably like 0. Whereas now, if I look at like the amount of times the word misinformation is used is extremely high, which sort of means that people are cultured to looking for things that are misinformation. So there's sort of this like weird feedback loop of like, if it exists, then people start just assuming most things are it, and that changes their perception of what truth is, from whether it's from these markets, whether it's from institutions. And in some ways, I think the nice thing about prediction markets, provided they have enough liquidity and the cost of manipulation is really high, is that if you get to that point, then you can at least have some faith that even if someone is doing something to create the perception of misinformation, they have a pretty high cost to doing it. And I think like that's probably the best you can hope for.
Yeah, I think financializing these outcomes do enable people with capital to be able to influence outcomes. But at the end of the day, it also provides a tool for people to dissect what's actually happening, who are the players. And having prediction markets built on blockchains ultimately enable you to possibly have a fairer chance at knowing or tracing, which parties are manipulating the price. Like you can actually tell if a single person is pushing a price a certain way and track their history with wallets and everything, and that's something that you couldn't be able to do in a centralized prediction market. So I do think that permissionless and prediction markets that are built on open blockchains can help on that front. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Generally feeling very optimistic about growth of prediction markets on Solana and crypto and beyond. Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you guys want to finish with any concluding thoughts, feel free to jump in. If not, we can adjourn today.
Thank you, everyone. LFG.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Yep. Thanks for having us. Bet more.
Bet more.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.